Coming up on Bridge City News, the new Lethbridge Police Chief, Shaheen Medizadeh, who officially takes over August 31st, meets the media in Lethbridge for the first time. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaks about how well Canada has been flattening the COVID-19 curve. And an interview with Gary Stagg from Open Doors Canada, who explains how young Christian girls being kidnapped continues unabated in many countries around the world.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The province announced today that it has kicked off construction of the Alberta leg of the Keystone XL pipeline. The project will employ around 2,000 people as workers build pipeline from Hardisty, Alberta to Steel City, Nebraska. Premier Jason Kenney says this is another example of his government helping to get Albertans working again.
My understanding is that hotels and motels are at near capacity around here and will stay that way until at least April of next year. And the town's population of just over 1,000 is expected to double by mid-August when the construction workforce here is at its peak. Many of these skilled Alberta tradespeople and workers who are making oil in their home have been out of work themselves for months. They'll now be collecting paychecks and using some of that to hard-earned pay in local restaurants, desperate for customers and revenue as they begin to reopen following the peak of the COVID pandemic. This, folks, is just one example of what will be happening in communities all along this nearly 2,000-kilometer-long route. From the Hardisty terminal in east central Alberta to Steel City, Nebraska. From there, it will go to the U.S. Gulf Coast refineries to meet critical needs for the production and delivery of the goods and services that we North Americans use every single day.
On August 31st, the City of Lethbridge will welcome its newest police chief. Chief Shaheen Medizadeh will join the LPS after serving more than 30 years with the RCMP. The incoming chief spoke with the media earlier today and said he's humbled and honored to serve our community and lead the LPS.
Policing is an expensive venture in any community. So as taxpayers, I often say, nobody works for me. Coming as a chief of police, some people have the ideology that people work for them. Nobody works for me. We all work for our citizens because that's who is actually hiring us to perform a duty. And I want to keep that as a team concept. So leadership to me is not about your rank or title, doesn't buy you, those things don't buy you power. Rank and title, they just give you levels of accountability. The higher you go, the higher accountability you have. And my accountability as a chief here will be to every employee in Lethbridge Police Service and also every citizen in this community.
A note from the City of Lethbridge to not float on the Old Man River this weekend since the river banks are quite dangerous. City officials say the recent rains have contributed to make those banks soft. The river is also 1.5 meters deeper than it normally is for July. Members of Lethbridge Fire and Emergency Services will be monitoring the river on an ongoing basis. The RCMP are looking for youth who want to make a difference in their community. Applications are being accepted for the RCMP National Youth Advisory Committee. They're looking for young people ages 13 through 21 to discuss youth victimization and crime issues. The RCMP say that for youth, this provides some solid experience for their futures.
Well, for the youth, it's important. It gives them that much-needed experience to be involved in committees like this for when they're, moving into their lives and taking on work tasks, those sorts of things. It will also potentially give them the opportunity for reference letters to use for scholarships or employment opportunities, use them on university or college applications. There's also opportunity to use the hours done through this committee for volunteer hours.
Up to 100 youth are allowed to sign up, and the deadline to apply for the RCMP Youth Advisory Committee is September the 11th. A demand letter has been sent to a couple of long-term care homes in BC by the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, demanding that family members be allowed to provide essential care and support for their elderly loved ones. Now, to talk more about this, from Calgary is a lawyer with the Justice Centre, Jay Cameron. Jay, these are uncertain times. You can really understand why staff at these long-term care facilities may be cautious, but at the same time, this is hurting our seniors mentally and emotionally.
It is, and it's also hurting their families. But the seniors and other people in long-term care homes have been locked in rooms, isolated for months on end, and families are desperate to get in to see them. And so I understand the reticence about allowing too many people in, but at the same time, seniors have a right to have visitors as well. They haven't done anything wrong, but yet they're being almost incarcerated in their rooms.
What are the current restrictions set in place in BC regarding COVID-19?
Up until 3 days ago, nobody could get in, even though, unless you were an essential visitor, you couldn't get in. And an essential visitor was somebody who provided essential care, like feeding or changing. And so a lot of family members fit that description. And then 3 days ago, the list was expanded, and now one family member can also get in. But the practical reality on the ground is that some of the long-term care homes are still saying, unless your family member is on the verge of death, you can't come in and see them. And so there's a lack of continuity between the government regulations and what's being implemented by the care homes.
What did you ask for specifically in your demand letter to these care homes, Eden Gardens and the Nanaimo Seniors Village?
Family members need access. That's the bottom line. They need reliable, dependable access. They're willing to take precautions, but they want access now. They want to be able to check and make sure that their loved ones are okay, that they're being properly cared for, but also they want to be able to ensure that there's proper socialization going on, that there's the things which make life meaningful are not being removed from their family members. And so that's what we want, Hal.
Jay Cameron, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Hal.
As you've heard on BCN, Edmonton will potentially be hosting the Stanley Cup final if Edmonton's chosen as one of the hub cities. Now that is if COVID-19 also doesn't get in the way of player and staff safety. Now aside from that possibility, the excitement surrounding this decision is huge for hockey fans. TSN's Dave Jameson, host of 1260's The Jameson Show, says the impact is great not only for the sport, but to bring up the spirits of Canadians during a difficult time.
I think where you're going to see it tangibly play out, because people can't gather at the arena in large groups to watch this, is you're going to see that local sports bar that has historically been a place where people can gather. Now, at least in the early rounds, you're going to have 3, 4, 5 games playing in a day. What does that do for business, right? Can they monetize the return to play? I don't know what the economic impact is of being a hub city, and I'm not sure anybody really does know that. But I think that's where we'll see it at street level. The hockey will, once it gets back on the ice, is going to be fine. It's the National Hockey League. It's the best in the world. I'm more interested in what it does to lift spirits in the community.
The Edmonton Oilers have not been to the Stanley Cup final since losing Game 7 in 2006 to the Carolina Hurricanes. An instrument that has been 6 years in the making has finally been completed. As Micah Quinn explains, two friends in Lethbridge were right in the middle of making sure that each intricate detail was made with purpose and without flaw.
This is the sweet sound of an electric cello turned steampunk. For Peter Gilligan, the thought of building an electric cello was never a top priority until his friend, Chris Hodgson Bright, mentioned it to him.
We just started right in on it, and that went for a few weeks on weekends, and he would come out and we'd work on it.
The creation of the electric steampunk cello took just over 6 years, and for Peter Gilligan, he worked long days and nights to be able to get the project done, citing the COVID lockdown as a big reason why he was able to finish the project.
It's probably over 200 hours of concentration, and I haven't been able to do that with anything.
The electric cello was inspired by the steampunk genre.
The classical cello elements, so the wood mixed with the metal components, really do have that kind of steampunk flavor to it. And then Peter's style is just so interesting and fascinating for how he builds things. So it really was a work of art that I thought was incredible how he put this all together.
Hodgson Bright says that a lot of people don't recognize the talent that is in our own backyards. All you have to do is a little searching to find it.
I think Peter's done an incredible job with this, and it just shows like the level of detail and craftsmanship that he has, and I think he's incredibly talented.
For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
For the first time in its 10-year history, Shakespeare in the Park in Lethbridge has been cancelled. But tonight, in a special virtual production, the Lethbridge Shakespeare Performance Society was producing The Merry Wives of Windsor.
Usually when you see a live play, you know, you usually see everybody's, like, the whole stage, and, you know, everybody's interacting with one another. But with our production, you would probably see 4 or 5 different cameras, like 5 or 4 or 5 different boxes on YouTube, and then you would look, every actor that would be speaking would be over one particular one Zoom, and then it would switch to another person speaking, and then it would switch to another person speaking. So that way, you know, nobody's taking attention off of somebody else.
You can also access a link to the performance via YouTube or on the Lethbridge Shakespeare Performance Society's Facebook page. Many Canadians got pets during the recent COVID-19 lockdown. After all, they make wonderful companions. Dogs, like people, need social interaction. Experts say it's important for our furry friends to get time outside of the home as our world slowly reopens.
They've missed us, they've missed their friends. They actually come back in, most of them are coming back in like they didn't even skip a beat. They're coming right back, they're seeing who's here. A lot of them will smell the leash wall and they'll be like, my friend, my friend, my friend, and they're super excited. They'll come back. Some of these dogs, the owners are just opening the door to their vehicle and the dog is running straight into us. They're so pumped and it makes us feel so good. And then once they're in here, sometimes we've got to reiterate some structure again. But as soon as they realize that we're rolling it that way, they're back in sync. It's like they didn't skip a beat. If you can get them into some social setting that's structured, structure is the key because they've just been used to so much at home time and not having to be away from their owners, that it's good for them to come here and then we can help work on some of that stuff as well.
Canada now has 105,000 cases of COVID-19, but fortunately, close to 70,000 people have recovered. Sadly, however, there have also been close to 8,700 deaths from the virus. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says new federal public health models are showing that restrictions have helped Canada suppress the virus, but he says there are still hotspots in our country.
After a very challenging spring, things are continuing to move in the right direction. We still have some hot spots in some parts of the country, but nationally, the number of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths is declining over time. And that's because Canadians are doing their part. I want to stress, though, that while we're on the right track, the fight against COVID-19 is not over yet. As we start to reopen parts of the economy, we must continue to follow local public health guidelines to keep each other safe.
COVID-19 is a disease which is not only affecting the elderly, but many of our young people as well. At least 18 students at the University of Washington in Seattle have now come down with the virus. The students live in fraternity houses near the school's campuses. They're taking extra precautions, but many are still quite concerned.
Everyone who I live with is taking extra precautions. We're all going and getting tested this week. A lot of people that I know who are living in or around the fraternities are also taking precautions and getting tested.
I have seen people, they're just living their normal life. And, you know, if they, as many times they just party and enjoy.
Young adults are more likely to be asymptomatic and not have severe symptoms.
I think a lot of young people and just people in general who aren't taking precautions.
And that's why we are concerned. We're seeing an increase in cases among the young generation, right? Young adults.
Meanwhile, in California, the state is closing many businesses and services once again due to a second wave of COVID-19. More people are testing positive as more are being tested.
It began to get more worrisome when people noticed that the test positivity rate was increasing. To give you context, it was sort of like in the 4.5 range, and then it started creeping up to 5.5. Now it's about 6% positive rate. And what that means is that if you accept that more people are getting tested, your positivity rate should actually be stable at the best and actually go down, because you would expect that more worried well would probably get tested. But the fact that it's going up shows that a higher proportion of a general population is turning out to be positive, suggesting that it's a true increase. In terms of what went wrong, I think many people in public health trace it to the Memorial Day effect. And of course, it's complicated, but many people, after staying months and months in a unified way and being really good, just got tired, particularly I think young people. There were, of course, people flocking to SoCal beaches.
Certain sectors of the state, we are now requiring they close their indoor operations due to the spread of the virus.
There are 2.8 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the United States, along with 131,000 deaths as a result of the virus. Fortunately, 857,000 people have also recovered. Even though U.S. President Donald Trump does not usually wear a mask, government officials there are still encouraging others to do so.
The president specifically put in his speech encouraging Americans to wear masks, social distance, and hygiene, because he's the president of the United States and people are not around him close, and the people who are around are tested. I don't think he needs to wear a mask, but the rest of us absolutely, and the president supports wearing masks. I was at the House this week testifying. I'm sure you saw my picture with Chair Powell on the Wall Street Journal. I never thought we'd have a picture like that, but yes, we are encouraging Americans to wear masks. Now, I think what Dr. Fauci said is that if people don't take these things seriously, that the numbers could continue to spike. So, again, what I'd say is the numbers are up. We're obviously watching this very carefully. We think that there is the right balance, and we're working with the states.
An international group of think tanks from 35 countries has penned an open letter condemning the actions of the Communist Party of China. This week, the Chinese government passed its controversial national security law, which allegedly violates Hong Kong's basic law and encroaches on the city's freedoms and liberties. The letter details Hong Kong's success since the Second World War in becoming one of the most prosperous, entrepreneurial, and freest places on earth. Now, Fred McMahon from the Fraser Institute, who spearheaded the letter, says the people of Hong Kong deserve international support in their fight to preserve one nation, two systems tradition. Young Christian girls being kidnapped is a real problem in many countries around the world, according to Open Doors Canada. Now, Gary Stagg is the executive director with the organization, and he says pressure is being put on the Egyptian government to take a stand against those kidnappings in Egypt.
This is a problem that happens not only in Egypt, but as you know, in Nigeria. The Chibok girls that were taken, forced to marry Muslim men, older Muslim men, is often the case that the thing that happens to them. And the other thing that often happens is a forced conversion. So they're forced to convert to Islam.
Gary will also have details on how many Christians are being forced into Hinduism in India. That is coming up in the second half of our show. A unique outreach to the surfing community is making waves in northern Portugal. Over the past 5 years, a surf church is reaching some of the hard-to-reach areas, bringing the good news of salvation. We have more now in this report.
A growing church planting ministry run by Operation Mobilization is having a significant impact on the surfing community in northern Portugal. Surf Church Porto began in the home of Troy and Michelle Pitney in 2015.
6 or so of us met in our house and in our living room, and we began worshiping the Lord and looking at scripture and starting to function as a church and praying that God might do something with it. And then little by little, things grew. January 2017, we finally had to move out of our house. We had at times 60, 70, 80 people packed in our living room. So we found a location right on the beach, right in front of the surf. It was really just a dream location to be.
Michelle Pitney explains how moving to this location also enabled them to grow their children's ministry.
Moving into our new church building opened such a huge opportunity for the children's ministry. I think our church really found a heartbeat for kids, and creating a safe place where kids can come from anywhere, any season of life, and feel loved and learn about the love of God.
Church member Catherine Graber says they're also impacting many lives through their dance outreach.
One of my students brought one of her friends, and this friend just loved dance, and she came here just for that purpose. She didn't know this was a church or anything to do with a church, and when she found out, she was amazed that a church includes dance or surf or other activities like skate.
In 2018, Surf Church Porto planted another church in Viana, Troy Pitney concluded by sharing his vision to see many more new fellowships like this planted across Portugal.
I would hope that that church in Vienna becomes a church that plants churches, that creates disciples, that make disciples, that make disciples. Therefore, new churches and new opportunities for new church plants would come out of it. Of course, I'd love to see the church grow. I'd love to see it reach the city, but I'd love to see that church reproducing into more and more communities of Jesus followers.
Peter Wooding for the Global News Alliance.
That is great to see. And if you want to see some movies this weekend, it's a great time. The Movie Mill is open once again. There's some great classic films playing there, including Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. With more, here's Len Binning with a Movie Mill Minute.
A brand new comedy hits the theaters this week, Irresistible, from director Jon Stewart. You may know him from The Daily Show. It stars Steve Carell, Rose Byrne, and Chris Cooper as they draw lines and do battles, Republican versus Democrat, in a little Wisconsin town.
Colonel Jack Hastings is our key back into the great now swing state of Wisconsin. He just doesn't know it yet.
Next up, we have the amazing true story of Jeremy Kemp, a Christian music star, and his journey of love and loss, and proving that there is always hope in the midst of tragedy, and that the only real faith is tested faith.
Earlier this year, we had some tough news. Some really tough news. Can we do something special for the most special person in my life tonight? Can we pray for her? Heal her tonight.
And keeping with bringing back the classics, this week we introduce Back to the Future. Marty McFly, played by Canada's own Michael J. Fox, stars in this fabulous film. And then along with that, we have the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory from 1971, starring Gene Wilder. This one you do not want to miss.
Open it, Charlie. Let's see that golden ticket.
Wouldn't that be fantastic? It's not fair to raise his hope.
Never mind. Go on, open it, Charlie. I want to see that gold.
Stop it, Dad. I've got the same chance as anybody else, haven't I?
Great movies at the Mill once again. Nice to see all of the sunshine again after all of the recent rain we've had. The sun will be sticking around for the next few days. Full weather details are coming up. It was another beautiful day in the Windy City, wasn't it? But tonight, there's a chance of showers developing with a low near 10. Tomorrow, lots of sunshine with a high expected near 25. Sunday, sunny again with a high near 24. Monday, blue sky and 24 degrees. A low pressure system returns on Tuesday, bringing more clouds and a daytime high near 20. A good chance of rain developing on Wednesday with the mercury increasing to 23. A mixture of sun and cloud and 24 degrees for Thursday. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 24 degrees and an average low of 10. The highest temperature in the state was recorded in 1996 at 33 degrees, and the record low was a chilly 2 degrees in 1979. Sunrise was at 5:30, sunset at 9:42. Looking at the national forecast for tomorrow now, Victoria will be mainly cloudy and a high near 20. A mixture of sun and cloud and 19 for Vancouver. Thunder showers and 21 is on tap for Calgary on Saturday. Rain and 23 for Edmonton. Showers and 27 for Regina tomorrow. Thunder showers and 26 is on tap for Saskatoon. Winnipeg had a heat warning today. Tomorrow, a good chance of rain developing with a high near 27. Toronto also had a heat warning today. Tomorrow, mainly sunny with a high near 32. Expect sunshine and 29 in our nation's capital tomorrow. Sunny and 30 for Montreal. Fredericton should receive some rain and a high near 26. Mainly cloudy and 22 for Halifax. A mixture of sun and cloud and 24 for Charlottetown. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect lots of clouds and a high near 13 degrees for tomorrow. Our country's trade deficit shrank in May thanks to an increase in auto exports. Overall, however, exports are still down sharply from a year ago. According to Stats Canada, the merchandise deficit contracted to $677 million in May, compared with a deficit of $4.3 billion in April, when exports and imports both plunged due to the coronavirus pandemic. Total exports rose 6.7% in May to reach $34.6 billion. Stats Canada notes, however, that they were down 34.1% from a year ago. Nestle Canada is selling its Pure Life bottled water business to Ice River Springs as Ontario prepares to give its towns and cities veto power over new water bottling permits. The sale for an undisclosed price is expected to close in the third quarter. Company President Jeff Hamilton said the company has decided to focus instead on its international brands, including San Pellegrino and Perrier. Ice River, which is a Canadian family-owned bottled water company, says the acquisition fulfills its ambition to expand beyond its private label business for various retailers. Le Chateau is the latest Canadian company to shift gears and begin producing personal protective equipment for healthcare workers. The clothing retailer says it has started manufacturing 500,000 hospital gowns that will all be made in Canada. The gowns are being made in partnership with Logistic Unicor and its contract with the federal government. Great Britain is scrapping a 14-day quarantine rule for arrivals from 60 countries deemed low risk for COVID-19. They include Germany, France, Spain, and Italy. The U.S. is not included because it has the highest number of coronavirus cases and deaths in the world. The change takes effect on July 10th, just over a month after the UK began requiring international arrivals to self-isolate for 2 weeks. The announcement comes as pubs, restaurants, and hair salons in England prepare to reopen tomorrow in the country's biggest step out of the lockdown. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 25 points to finish at 15,595. The Dow was up 92 points to 25,827. The S&P 500 was up 14 points to 3130, and the Nasdaq was up 53 points to finish the day at 10,207. Oil was down 33 cents to $40.32 per barrel. Natural gas was up 2 cents to $1.75. Gold was down $3.33 to $17.7205 an ounce, and silver was up 6 cents to $18.02 an ounce. Wheat is at $235 per metric ton, barley's at $240, canola's at $475, and corn is at $233 per metric ton. Live cattle were up $210 to $99.40, feeder cattle were up $1.80 to $134.88, and lean hogs were up 13 cents to $49.20. The Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to $73.82 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Canada now has 105,000 cases of COVID-19, but fortunately, close to 70,000 people have already recovered. Sadly, however, there have also been 8,700 deaths from the virus. Meanwhile, in the United States, recent reports said that there have been close to 102,000 COVID-19 cases recorded in the last couple of days alone. Fracking. It's a controversial technique in which rock is fractured, allowing gas and petroleum to flow more freely. It's controversial because some believe the practice may cause earthquakes. Coming up, an interview with Paul Murphy from the Fraser Institute, who discusses the pros and cons of fracking.
Fracking in the oil and gas sector has been getting some negative attention over the last number of years, with complaints that this poses a risk to water quality, air quality, the health of our ecosystem. Our guest today has done a study on this. Robert Murphy is a senior fellow with the Fraser Institute think tank. So welcome to Bridge City News, Robert.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
You bet. Fracking, certainly a contentious issue, even in the U.S. presidential election these days. Leading Democrat candidate Senator Bernie Sanders says if he's elected, he would ban it nationwide. Some of the other candidates saying similar things. So, Robert, can you explain for our viewers in layman's terms what exactly is fracking, and also what are the economic benefits that this practice brings?
Well, sure. So actually, what people usually mean by fracking actually involves two separate things. So it's hydraulic fracturing, which is where the term fracking comes from. And that means just injecting water and other chemicals down into the ground and like into the pores between rocks to sort of open them up and loosen them up to allow the natural gas and oil to flow to the surface more easily. But the other technique that has been applied with is what's called horizontal drilling. And so those two things in conjunction are what has allowed what's we refer to now as like the boom in fracking. And so the benefits are just that it allows for producers in Canada and the United States to access more of the natural resources that are available there. Just to give an example, in Canada, the recent estimates show that of the marketable resources of natural gas, just over 70% are developed in terms of unconventional ones. And so the idea being that there's more than, if you're looking at natural gas in Canada, with fracking, it effectively more than doubles the amount that could be brought to market. So that's just to show, again, just the tremendous potential there from using this technique.
Yeah, that's very significant. You do the math on that for sure. So fracking, there are some definite economic benefits, but also potentially there's some risks involved with this as well. What is the history, I guess, of the complaints we receive about fracking? When did that start?
Well, I mean, right when it began, I think when it started, the boom in fracking took off. Some environmental groups, of course, began raising concerns. In the United States, I know that probably around 2012 is when it became a really big issue because Matt Damon, some of your viewers might know, he was in a movie, The Promised Land, that featured people that were victimized by big oil companies coming in and drilling, and then that things didn't go well. So I would say, in terms of just the public awareness and what put this on the radar, that probably from 2012 onward, it seemed to be that people who were against climate change and are very concerned in those things, that fracking to them became a very serious issue.
Okay, and to be sure, again, there are some risks, so we'll take a look at some of those here. Now, you break it down into 4 myths, and so let's get started with that, I guess. Myth number 1, and that is that fracking causes earthquakes. So yes or no? What do you say on that one?
So sure. So if what you mean by an earthquake is just a seismic event, then yes, it does do that. Because what you're doing is it's pumping water at high velocity, down to the ground, and depending on where you are in the state of the ground underneath, that can cause readjustments. So it is true. Some of the studies will show that certain regions in the United States where fracking really took off, there's a lot more measured seismic events that they think are induced by the human activity. But then that term earthquake, I think, can be misleading, right? People have the idea that buildings are falling down. There has not been a single death in the United States attributed to an earthquake caused by fracking. Most of these things are very minor. In many cases, people might not even know that it happened. So they can detect it, but again, it's not as if bridges are falling down. So I think the term earthquake might be misleading, but yes, strictly speaking, by pumping the water in down there, they can disturb some of the motion.
Right, but we're not talking, again, like you say, something that causes fatalities. And would you say in most cases then that these seismic events, slight tremors, I don't know what level they measure them at, calculate them at, but most people wouldn't even notice. Would that be correct?
I think that's a fair statement to say. The other thing too is, regardless of the degree of severity, that it's not fracking per se that causes it. That the latest research suggesting that if they just change the techniques, like as to how rapidly they pump the water in or the depth to which they pump it down in terms of the wastewater disposal, that could solve the problem. So again, it is an issue, but right now it's not as if there's significant damage. Like I say, there's no fatalities that have been attributed to it. And again, it's not that, we either have to choose fracking or this. It's you could continue to use these techniques to bring more natural gas to market and just change the way that they get rid of the wastewater.
Right. Again, you have to measure that risk-benefit ratio, right? And now, would it be appropriate then for the government or the industry to put tighter regulations in place then for how they dispose of the wastewater?
Well, sure. So just to be clear, what I did in the study for the Fraser Institute is I just summarized the literature in terms of what the risks were. The one thing I'm very comfortable in saying is the outright provincial bans, like in Quebec and New Brunswick, I think that's overkill, right? And the analogy I would just use is driving a car has risks, but if provinces just banned cars altogether, that would clearly be the wrong thing to do. Now, when it comes to what should they do in response, again, it depends on costs and benefits. So certainly what the literature shows, and as our discussion continues, I'll give you more specifics as to things they could do to minimize the impact. And I remain agnostic as to, is this just something industry should comply with, or local governments enforcing it? A part of the problem is just there's different regulations in place, and I didn't want to weigh in on who should do what. I just want to summarize what the academic literature says about what the risks are and how to deal with it.
Okay, and I was reading here, ironically to me, that carbon capture and storage, due to the large net volumes of the injected fluids, may have potential for inducing larger seismic events. That's interesting.
Right, yeah, because again, it's the same principle that how could it be that human activity is going to cause an earthquake? It's, well, if we're injecting stuff down deep, and it might disturb the rocks that are, on how they sit on each other, and they might move. So yes, the some of the proposals for carbon capture and storage, yeah, it's capturing the CO2 as it's leaving a smokestack or whatever, and then injecting it down into the ground where it's not going to contribute to climate change. And ironically, yeah, that's the same mechanism by which people are concerned about fracking.
Yeah, okay. Well, myth number 2, that is fracking threatens water quality and the availability of water as well. Now, and again, we hear the stories, right? And they're pretty cool stories. I mean, apparently this really happens. The stories of people lighting water on fire because it's mixed with methane gas. Is this because of again, fracking? Do you want to address that?
Sure. So again, with this, there are cases where there was contamination. So I don't want to misrepresent what happened to your viewers. But again, the systematic studies that we summarized in the article, and this is also too like meta studies, like reviews of the literature conducted by Canadian Council of Scientists, the U.S. EPA. They found that there's very modest risks, that there were a few cases, but relative to the number of wells that were in operation that were, using fracking techniques, it was a very small proportion. And then even in the problem cases where they did identify and say, yes, groundwater had been contaminated, for example, it wasn't, again, fracking per se. It was things like, okay, they had shallow pits where they were storing some of the wastewater and they didn't line them. And so that's how it seeped in. So it was things like that where the fix would be, okay, do a better job of lining the pits for wastewater disposal, as opposed to just, okay, we can't use fracking anymore. So the big picture conclusion is that there are risks, but it's the actual demonstrated harm was very small relative to how many operations were going, and the solution would not be to ban it outright.
So again, this is not the actual fracking, but does go, of course, hand in hand with it. So you have these shallow wells, and if they're too shallow, you're saying you have to line them properly so it doesn't leak into the groundwater here, correct? And how many people, I mean, if it isn't done properly, I mean, how many people are being affected by this? I mean, are we talking hundreds of people? Are we talking tens of thousands of people? What are we talking about here?
I can't give you a specific number because the literature is actually surprisingly vague. But again, the way they're describing it in the literature is it's very few isolated cases. Another consideration is one of the studies showed that, yes, there was high methane concentrations, but they realized that was just naturally occurring. That it's, in other words, it was a region where fracking had been going on. So again, with these things, it's a twofold process. That number one, is there problems with the water, and then is that because of the fracking or not? But again,
okay, so just to clarify, so in some of these areas, the methane that's there is not there because of the fracking. It's just there naturally, and that sometimes does actually mix with the water, and then you can set your water on fire, I guess.
Right. So I don't know if it was the case of people setting their water, but yes, and these were researchers who were skeptical of fracking, who they were surprised and said, we have to admit, these cases that we looked at, it wasn't the fracking causing it; it was just naturally, the water in this area.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, okay, it's good to differentiate there for sure. Okay, and fracking, does it use too much fresh water? Right, again, there's a concern, right, for the environment. Do we have any stats on that? Whether using recycled water, as compared to fresh, what that ratio is like, to what degree are we using fresh water?
Yeah, I was trying to find a specific number for it, and I think it varies from operation to operation, and also the techniques have evolved over time, so I hesitate to give you a number. I do know, though, that there's a trade-off that, so it's true. I mean, a horizontally drilled well, just a single one, can use something like 5 million gallons of water, for example. So that's just to give you an idea. But on the other hand, even though that sounds like a huge number, compared to agriculture or electricity generation, fracking is still not a big user overall. The issue with using fresh water versus recycled is then if you use recycled water, that reduces the strain on the fresh water, but then when they're re-injecting down to get rid of it, well, then that's more problematic, right? You'd rather be using fresh water, so it's a trade-off, because
that could then contaminate the groundwater, right? So okay, gotcha. And matter of fact, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency also did some studies on this as well, correct?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So that's a main feature that we did in the study, was just to go ahead and summarize what they did. And again, this was a 1,000+ page study that US EPA came out with, reviewing all the literature as of that day. I think it was a 2016 study. And again, they went in and they were saying, yes, there are some issues, but overall, it doesn't seem like there's widespread impacts on drinking water quality.
Okay, so some perspective needed on this for sure. All right, another myth that you address here, you call it a myth, and that is, does fracking contribute to climate change, right? And now certainly, again, we just mentioned earlier that fracking does emit methane gas, which is, again, many people would see as a problem climate-wise.
Right. Yeah. So to be clear, so this isn't the methane in the water. This is the actual gas emitting from the operations. So yes, it is true that fracking does release methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. More potent than CO2. But even on that, if you adjust for or compensate for the amount of natural gas produced, fracking operations actually reduce less methane than conventional natural gas operations. So that's one thing. But the other huge consideration is natural gas displaces coal in terms of electricity generation. In the CO2 that it releases, natural gas is much cleaner in that respect than coal is. And so I would argue on net that fracking reduces, humankind's impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions overall.
Gotcha. So a big picture, I mean, if you look at it narrowly and say, well, yes, this emits methane into the atmosphere, so therefore it's bad for the climate. But big picture, if it's taking away a much worse offender, if you will, coal, then will this actually contribute to, I guess, a positive to the whole climate change debate, right? So, yeah, I get what you're saying here. Interesting. Now, the other myth that you address is noise pollution, which is interesting. I mean, I guess if you live close by, how bad is it, the noise?
Sure. So yeah, we addressed one study that I had found recently that measured that. They went to a certain I think it was in Pennsylvania, and they went in, placed sound detection devices in homes that were located very near an operation, and they found, yep, you could, they could detect that there was operations nearby, but in terms of the volume, it was like a little bit louder than the hum of a refrigerator, but less of the volume than a normal conversation. So again, you could tell that was going on, but it was no louder than a refrigerator.
Right. So I guess if you're living really close by and you're super sensitive to sounds, could be an issue. But big picture, is it worth banning fracking over the noise concerns? That would seem, well, to me anyway, seems somewhat unreasonable. Yeah. Okay. Now, there are some provinces, you mentioned earlier, New Brunswick, Quebec, they placed some moratoriums on fracking, which is quite interesting because it's ironic when you look at what they're doing instead is importing U.S. natural gas, which is extracted from the ground through the use of fracking. So, yeah, I mean, what do you do with that? I mean, big picture is not really helping, is it?
Well, certainly not in that sense that, yeah, especially they're just getting it from somewhere else. And again, it's the idea there are risks here, but an outright ban to me just seems like it's clearly not the right solution. Again, because for each of these issues we've identified, there's ways that they can change the techniques they're using or the application of the fracking in order to minimize the risk. So an outright ban to me seems to be far too much of an overkill, especially to the extent that if climate change is the issue, because as we've said, it's fracking actually I think helps on climate change.
Very interesting. Okay. Well, we're running out of time here. So again, I mean, I know you're loath to say, well, the government should make some changes here, but as you indicated earlier, it seems that either government and or the industry need to kind of put their heads together here and maybe, adjust the regulations somewhat to make fracking safer than it currently is, correct?
Right. Yeah, I think like a list of best practices, and I should mention for all these things we mentioned, it's not that every operation is doing it. It's just there were some that were having these problems. So the ones that are being run more responsibly could be models for the others in the industry.
Right. Yeah. So we don't want to ignore the concerns, but we're saying let's get some perspective, big picture, and let's tighten things up, and we'll keep on using this to benefit the economy and even climate change, as you point out, that this can actually benefit. So, okay. Robert, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. You can read the study online at FraserInstitute.org. Robert Murphy is a senior fellow with the Fraser Institute think tank.
In many nations around the world, the persecution of Christians is happening on a daily basis. Open Doors Canada says each year 260 million Christians are persecuted for their faith in Jesus, and that number is going up. Now, what can we as believers in Canada do to help support our brothers and sisters? Prayer is probably a good start. Joining me now to talk about it further is Gary Stagg, Executive Director of Open Doors Canada, joining me from Mississauga, Ontario. Gary, welcome back to BCN.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, for those who may not know, what exactly is Open Doors Canada all about? What does your organization do?
Our organization supports persecuted Christians all around the world. It started 65 years ago with a guy by the name of Brother Andrew, who felt called of God to smuggle Bibles behind the Iron Curtain. Wow. And of course, since then, with the rise of Christian persecution, the ministry has expanded so that we work in over 60 countries around the world. We strengthen and equip Christians in the most dangerous places where to live as a Christian. And we provide discipleship, safe houses, trauma counseling, job training. We train leaders. We provide basic needs. We basically do whatever the persecuted church is asking us to do. So they're the ones that know what they need. And so we're here to respond to their needs. And we do that the best that we can.
Why does Open Doors produce the World Watch List each and every year? How is the list put together?
The World Watch List is put together by a lot of research that's happening basically around the clock. We have people that are in the field, people that work behind a desk, and their job is to put together the statistics to monitor what's happening all around the world when it comes to Christian persecution. And so it's known as the best resource of its kind, and a lot of governments and different political organizations, you name it, they look at it for direction in what's happening with Christians and in general religious persecution around the world.
Now, apparently, in some of these countries where Christians are persecuted, women are doubly persecuted for their faith and their gender. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, in many cases, unfortunately, women are considered to be almost second-class citizens in some of these cultures. And because of that, not only are they persecuted for their faith, but they are doubly persecuted because of their gender. And there's a whole study that's been done on this and a lot of research that's gone into it. And Open Doors just produced a paper on gendered persecution and the implications of that around the world for women. And so, yeah, you think of the persecution on one level, but when it comes to women, there's a double whammy. They are persecuted doubly.
Now, before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, Gary, you traveled to Malaysia and Egypt. What was the purpose of going to those countries?
The purpose of going was just to see the work that's happening, to encourage persecuted believers in those countries, just to see all of the work that we're doing there as an organization. And so it was a real joy for me to go and to meet with some wonderful people there, some brothers and sisters who really, when you get together with them, it's quite a humbling experience.
Now, a recent report is talking about the kidnapping of Christian girls in Egypt, and it continues unabated. Gary, a U.S.-based advocacy organization, Coptic Solidarity, is calling on the Egyptian government to step in and take a stand against these kidnappings. What happens to these girls once they're taken?
We don't have all of the details about what's happening to them, but this is a problem that happens not only in Egypt, but as you know, in Nigeria. You know, the Chibok girls that were taken, forced to marry Muslim men, older Muslim men, is often the case that the thing that happens to them, and the other thing that often happens is the forced conversion. So they're forced to convert to Islam as a part of their abduction. So a pretty terrible time for these young girls, and a lot of them are very young. Some of them are 12, 13, 14 years old, and many of them are still missing all around the world. It's not just in Egypt, but in many other countries as well.
How do the governments not look at these men as being pedophiles? Young children.
I know it, but it for whatever reason it's a societal acceptance. They accept it for whatever reason.
Their
It's
cultural norms,
something
I
that
guess,
they,
right?
yeah, and they just turn a blind eye to it. It's cultural norms.
Wow. And I bet a lot of these young girls get new identities as well, probably new names when they're forced to marry these older
Yeah,
men.
for sure.
Wow.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, things, Gary, are also apparently getting tougher for Christians in India. The northern Indian state of Haryana may become the 9th state to adopt legislation forcing conversion to Hinduism. What will that mean for many believers there?
Well, this is happening all over India, and we're hearing reports of atrocities that are happening. What's happened in India is that the government, the present government that was elected in 2014, has a mandate, and they want to turn India back to a Hindu country by the end of 2021. So that's not that far away. Right. And so they're very sympathetic to all of the people that the Hindu extremists. And so a lot of extreme things are happening to Christians, forced conversions again. If they don't comply, they are their churches are burned down. There's some horrible things that are happening to them. And basically, the government is saying to be Indian is to be Hindu. And so, again, they turn a blind eye to the extremism that's happening. The other thing that we're seeing in India right now, of course, is with COVID-19 and with the aid that's being distributed in many of these places, and where you mentioned, indeed, in North India, these are often rural places, and so the aid is given to the elders of the community to distribute. And so the elders of the community automatically know who the Christians are, and they force the Christians to wait at the back of the line, knowing that they will they're not going to get any food anyway. And so they send them to the back of the line, and they usually go without anything.
Are they doing this something similar to those who are Muslim, not just the Christians?
In India, yes, they're doing
Wow.
a similar thing to Muslim people in India.
Gary, how have you seen COVID-19 impact our persecuted brothers and sisters living in countries like China, North Korea, and Syria?
In many of the countries, COVID-19, I mean, persecution was bad before, but for our brothers and sisters who are being persecuted, COVID-19 has just added another whole layer to that. And many of these countries already have, very volatile health systems, economic systems, and so they're just not getting the help that they need. Again, in many places, because they're Christians, they're relegated to the end of the line. Or to the back of the line, and they're not able to get the medicine, the food, and all of the things that they need. And so in some places, they're just desperate. In India, I know that there are people who are starving.
So what initiatives is Open Doors taking to support persecuted Christians impacted by COVID-19, especially even in the northern camps in the Iraqi city of Mosul? I mean, the virus can spread quite quickly through the camps where so many have been displaced.
Well, that's the other thing, because they live in such close quarters, and we can social distance, and it's easy for us. I mean, I live in my house. I'm here. My wife is in her office upstairs, and we can do the social distancing thing. It's not a problem. But for these people, many times there's multiple families living under one roof. And so that becomes a problem. We've had to switch, to be honest, some of our programming, some of our priorities, where we were moving away from a lot of the aid stuff that we were doing in places like Syria, going to focus now in the next couple of years on more discipleship and training and so on. We've had to switch back and start to help with the feeding again.
Now, can you explain, Gary, what kind of impact these programs are really having on persecuted believers and their families?
Well, I think in many cases they're just keeping them alive, to be honest. And of course, the overarching thing is that they become very aware that that they're not alone, and that's so important for them to understand that there are people in the West who are remembering them, who have not forgotten them, who are holding them up in prayer. And so that's a big thing. But right now, it's just a matter of survival as well. So the things that we're doing are just trying to help them stay alive right now.
What are some of the things that most people do not realize about the persecuted church?
Oftentimes when people think of persecution, they automatically think of violence, and they think it's always violent, but it's not. I mean, there is the violence, obviously. We just talked about the girls being kidnapped and so on, and churches burned and pastors killed, and there are all of those things. But for the majority of people, it's just the marginalization every day of the things that they go through. They're just, like I say, put to the end of the line. They are given the worst jobs in society. They're held back. Their kids can't get decent education because they're Christians. And so there are all of these things that are just constantly squeezing them into that place where the persecutors want them to be. And so it's not always violence, but it's the daily pressure, the daily squeeze that they feel.
Gary, as Canadians, what can we do to really help our brothers and sisters in Christ who are suffering in these countries? I mean, prayer is probably a good start, right?
Yeah, you said prayer at the beginning, and I was so happy to hear that, because if you ask them, that's what they ask for. If you ask them, what can we do for you? They always say prayer, even though it's obvious they need so much other stuff. But they would say, pray for them. And I would say, don't forget about them and support them. Give them the prayer support they need, but also donate to organizations that are helping our brothers and sisters around the world who are going through persecution.
Now, you offer opportunities for people to join Open Doors for missions trips. Tell me more about that.
We go on trips of encouragement. Those have been suspended for this year, obviously, but we go on trips where we just go to encourage them. We call it our International Presence Ministry. So we don't go and make ourselves obvious and preach on street corners or, even build buildings and stuff like that. We don't do anything that will draw attention, but we go there to meet secretly with these believers and encourage them.
Last time you and I chatted as well, Gary, you mentioned countries like Pakistan, North Korea, and China, where persecution is really bad for Christians right now. Are those still some of the countries on your watch list?
Oh yeah, for sure. The Pakistan would be in the top 10. All of those that you mentioned are really high up on the list.
So where can viewers go to learn more about Open Doors and to donate?
They can go to opendoorsca.org, and they can sign up for our newsletter, for our prayer calendars. They can make donations there. And also I would mention that they can sign up for a Zoom prayer meeting. The first Tuesday of every month, we have just started a Zoom prayer meeting where we come together as believers in Canada to pray for the persecuted church. So we would invite anybody that wants to join us to go to our website at opendoorsca.org and sign up for that. And just inform yourself about what's happening, and then as the Lord would lead, just respond to what you're learning.
So Gary, what kind of rewards do you get out of being involved with Open Doors Canada?
For me, it's the reward of being with persecuted believers. I think it's just such the humbling experience of being with them. We often think of ourselves, I was a pastor for many years, and you think of yourself as having a certain level of spirituality. But when you're with a persecuted believer and, they're asking you to pray for them, and you see the incredible faith that they have, so often I want to say, can you please pray for me? I think I'm the one that needs the prayer.
Wow.
And so that's, I think, the gift. It just kind of puts things in perspective for me, and helps me to realize that I don't really have it all that bad here in Canada as a Christian.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Gary Stagg, Executive Director of Open Doors Canada, thanks for joining me today from Mississauga, Ontario.
You're very welcome. Thank you, anytime.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.